with everyone. Um, it's always a pleasure to present and train with my esteemed colleague and co-trainer, Frank Laney. So we're excited to be here with you. As Todd mentioned, this is the first of a three-part series. And so we're going to cover today the science of negotiation based in large part on one particular study that we have found incredibly illuminating that we're going to share with you. And then the other two parts 2 and 3, will be a little bit more of the art of how do we apply these scientific principles? How do we actually do it in practice? A little bit more of the habits that we need to build around implementing these tools and techniques in order to increase our effectiveness as negotiators. As Todd mentioned, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. The chat is voluminous, and so questions get lost in there. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A, and we will do our best to address it at the end of our presentation to make sure we have time to cover everything that we want to cover. So we will start like all lawyers do with good lawyers do, defining terms. So I'll turn it over to Frank to start defining our terms.
Right, we're going to do a pretty significant dive into negotiation, but before we do that, we need to agree on what negotiation is, because there's if you've ever been to a bookstore and looked in the negotiation catalog or shelf, there's probably 2, 3, 4 feet of books there on negotiation, and some of them are terrible, and some of them are great, and some of them are interesting, and some of them are not. So we need to make sure that for our purposes, we all have the same definition. So negotiation, as Colleen and I like to define it, is an interaction or communication between two or more people with the intent of modifying the behavior of the other or others. Sometimes there's maybe more than one person across the table from you. So it's interaction or communication. Not all negotiation is communication. Nor is not all of it's verbal, not all it's written. So it can't simply be body language, how you interact, how you look at people, that sort of thing. So we're not going to deal deeply with that, but those are things not to be ignored. Your facial expressions and that sort of thing. But the key is that you're communicating to somebody else with the intent of modifying their behavior. So they are going to do something today. I want them to do something different from the normal flow of their daily business, daily how they would handle things. And so the metaphor I like to use is, imagine you're standing on a bridge in the mountains, a little stream flowing underneath the bridge, and you see a leaf fall into the stream. Now you know the leaf is going to go underneath the bridge. It's going to happen. That's the way the water flows. But what you don't know is it going to go to the left or the right of that rock? Is it going to go over to the side and get whirled in an eddy for a few minutes and then come out? How exactly how's it going to go underneath the bridge? What's its path going to be? And what can I do to influence that path? So persuading others to do something that they would not have ordinarily done. A little bit more concrete for lawyers. I want, Colleen negligently, flagrantly, viciously runs the stop sign, runs into me and breaks my leg and wrecks my car and breaks my leg. So her insurance company, I sue her, but her insurance company comes forward. And so they want Frank Laney, this old doddering fellow who can barely walk anymore, to accept $20,000 for his broken leg. Well, Frank Laney thinks, well, yeah, I'm not maybe the best of health, not as good as I used to be, but, I still get out, I walk, I enjoy running, I ride my bike, and that sort of thing. My leg's worth more like $100,000 than $20,000. So I want to negotiate to influence Colleen's insurance provider to write a check for $100,000, something that they would not have ordinarily done. What does that person want to influence me to do? For me to sign a release and waiver, releasing Colleen from any liability in exchange for a check for merely $15,000, maybe $20,000. So that's what the negotiation is about, trying to get the other person to do something that they would not have ordinarily done. So and there's some frame to this. Different people approach conflict, negotiation, resolutions in different ways. So how do people get persuaded? So if you're in a power setting, I'm threatening you. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to do something bad to you. That's competition. And so in a power setting or in competitive setting, I use my power. I convince you I have more power than you do, and therefore you must do or you should do what I want you to do. I like to use sports metaphors. So in basketball, when you have the ball, it's a competitive setting. I do everything I can to make sure within the rules to make sure you do not score. When I have the ball, you do the exact same thing. It's competitive. You use your power, your skill, your speed, etc., to keep me from scoring. If it's a relationship, an accommodation setting, then relationship is what's important. So, for example, me and my wife, I historically tended to work from home, had a home office. My wife worked out in the real world, and she'd come home in the evening and say, "Would you like to go out for dinner?" Well, for me and from my point of view, the main thing I want to do is get out of the house. I've been in the house all day long. So I don't really, so yes, the answer is always yes, I want to go out to dinner. The next question is, where do you want to go? And I don't care because my primary goal has already been satisfied. I'm leaving the house. So where do I want to go? I don't care. And so I am quite willing to defer to her for a couple of reasons. One is my primary goal is already satisfied. Two, I honestly really don't care unless my stomach's bothering me or something, or I have a real hankering for some particular kind of food. But the main reason is because of relationship. My after leaving the house, my next goal is, having not seen anybody all day, is to spend time with my wife, to want to spend time with her. And so what we're eating doesn't really factor into it. It's the relationship. Or if she really wants something, it's more important to me to have a good time with my wife than it is for me to have a particular food that I want if she's not going to like it. So I'd rather her be happy eating the food she wants and have a good time with her. So relationships frequently come out of it's probably the primary factor in an accommodation setting. So in a relationship, I usually give in to the other person, whatever you want. If we want to get a deal done, then we compromise. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about all the factors and all the ins and all the outs and all the ups, all the downs. We just want a deal done. So, okay, I want 10, you want 20. We'll tell you what, let's meet in the middle and do 15 and let's go. So compromise is a shortcut to getting a deal done when you don't want to spend a lot of time discovering whether 16 or 17 or 12 or 13 is really the number. You just want a deal done. So I'll meet you in the middle, 15, let's go. Okay, that's fine. In a collaborative setting, this is where everyone is working to try to get the best for everybody. We try to convince each other of what is good for all. This is not only good for me, it is also good for you. Tell me what you want. I'll try to work with you. So in a collaborative setting, we try to convince each other as to what is best for everyone in this deal. But if you can't convince someone, you can't persuade them, what they tend to do is they will walk away and avoid you. So if there's simply no deal to be done, they simply walk away and go talk to somebody else. So those are some of the ways in which people get persuaded. A little context, a little expanding the frame of the picture as we talk about negotiation. So Colleen, tell us about this study.
Yeah. So this was a really interesting study. It was admittedly some time ago, back in the 70s. Two English researchers, Neil Rackham and Mr. Carlisle, I can't remember his first name, studied the negotiating behavior of skilled negotiators. And they were looking at professional negotiators. So these are people who are paid to negotiate on behalf of someone else. And I think part of the reason that this study was so landmark was that I think it was the first time that people were able to get some insights into negotiations. A lot of negotiations are private, confidential. They don't want to be observed. But in this study, they observed 103 negotiating sessions. They had 49 skilled negotiators, and they wanted to look at what did the skilled negotiators do or avoid doing that the average negotiators didn't. So again, keep in mind that these are all the negotiators are professional negotiators who are experienced, who are paid to be negotiators. And this study wanted to look at how do we distinguish the best from the rest. And so they observed 56 planning sessions with skilled negotiators and 37 planning sessions with average negotiators. How do we define a skilled negotiator? In the study, Rackham and Carlisle defined skilled negotiators as those who both sides agreed the negotiator was effective. So both sides had to agree some level of objectivity that the negotiator was effective. And then they also wanted to look at what was their track record over a period of time. So we're not talking just one lucky deal or some sort of short-term success based on trickery or deception. They wanted to look at repeated successes and a track record of significant successes to be qualified as the skilled negotiator group. And then the last thing that they looked at was making sure that the deal could actually be implemented. So they wanted to look at not just the ability to reach a deal on paper, but can we reach one that we can sustain, that's viable, that we can implement, that is followed. And so those were the three main ways that Rackham and Carlisle identified the skilled negotiators. And Frank's going to talk a little bit about the planning behaviors that were observed in the study.
So in looking at planning or analyzing the planning that they observed, they found that planning was fundamental to successful negotiations. Walking to a negotiation, not knowing what you're doing, not knowing what you're talking about, as is sort of obvious, is not a recipe for success. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to know where you want to go, how you're going to get there, at least plan or think about it in advance. One of the things that came out of it, though, and we will see this throughout our discussion today, is that flexibility is critical to a negotiator. So not just plan, but also plan to be flexible. And we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that means, but not being overly constrained going into the negotiation. So for example, if your client says, go into the negotiation, get me 30, I don't care how you get it, that's it, all I want is 30. You probably will not be as successful as you could be if they gave you some more flexible instructions. So we will see flexibility as being a recurring theme. And by the way, there's another recurring theme, which we'll see here as well. The other recurring theme is understand the other side. It doesn't really make a lot of difference if negotiating if you don't even understand what the other side's coming from, what they're talking about, how they want things, etc. So flexibility on your part, understanding on the other for understanding the other side. So first, there's no significant difference between skilled negotiators on the amount of time spent planning. So it doesn't really matter whether it's a long planning session or a short planning session. What matters is how you spend the time that you have. So first thing is to explore options. Consider a wide range of outcomes or options while planning. What are the things that I would be, my client, what are the things that I would be satisfied with, but also what are the things the other side might pitch to me? What are the options that they might put on the table? Think about them in advance. So brainstorm, what do I think the other side's going to do, as well as what do I want to do? Skilled negotiators consider a wide range of options that they might suggest or the other side might offer. Increased exploration of opportunities makes for a better deal for both parties. And the sort of the core of that, the first question is money the only option? As lawyers, very frequently, we tend to go into negotiation going, the only issue is money. How big is the check going to be? And that is overly constraining. The research indicates that it's overly constraining. We need to be more flexible. Talk with our client about, is there something other than money that will help us solve this problem? Is there something else you want out of this other than money? Or is there some way that we can make the money flexible, like use an annuity rather than cash on the table now, or other ways of paying the money? The money goes to a charity rather than to me. I'm not saying that these are necessarily great ideas, but they're things to think about. So is money the only option? And during the exploration of options, skilled negotiators, next slide. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. Consider twice as many options. So skilled negotiators considered over 5 options per negotiator. The average negotiators did about 2.5. So skilled negotiators did twice as much of considering other options. The next is seeking common ground. So all negotiators want to explore areas of conflict and areas of agreement, and all negotiators concentrate on areas of disagreement. However, skilled negotiators spend 3 times as much time in the preparation looking at areas of common ground than do average negotiators. So skilled negotiators are trying to understand the other side. What are the things that they want? What are the things that they're dissatisfied with? What are the things they're going to want in the future? But also primarily, where are we already in agreement? What are the ways that I can go in and say, okay, we agree on 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to offer those to you. Do you agree to those? I know we got more things to talk about, but can we get those things off the table? And they say yes, then great, you've got the ball going. So seeking common ground is very important. So by seeking common ground, it sets a climate of agreement. And so there's a question in the research as to, are the skilled negotiators, are they setting the climate, or is the climate already there because of the way they behave coming into before they even came into the negotiation? They don't know, but the main point is, seeking common ground and setting a climate of agreement. And what I mean by climate of agreement is that, Colleen comes into the negotiation and she's going to be tough. Frank's not going to push her around today. And so she comes in all ready to fight. And Frank Laney, has been ready to fight in the past. But Frank Laney comes in this time and says, Colleen, I know there's some things that there were some tough discussions we have to have, but tell you what, do we all agree that the sky is blue, the trees are green, and dirt is brown? We all agree on that? Okay, great. And so we have set a climate of agreement. And obviously I'm talking about trivial things here because, I don't want to go into details on some hypothetical, but by getting things on the table. So maybe for Colleen, it is important that I agree or my client agrees that the trees are in fact green. So we now have an agreement on something that's important to her. Maybe not important to me, but it's important to her and her client. And so another benefit of that is later in the process, when we are having some tough negotiations, when, points 4 and 5, Colleen and I are just having some trouble with, Colleen wants to walk away. She's had it. She can't reach an agreement with this knucklehead Laney. But then she thinks about, however, Frank has agreed the trees are green. So that will tend to keep her at the table and make her a little more flexible later on because we've already reached an agreement that she likes. So building this climate of agreement helps you not just start the process, but also down the road, it builds a process that will lead more likely to an agreement. And so once again, it's understanding the other side, spending some time to understand the other side. And so the data indicates that skilled negotiators make 3 times in the planning process, 3 times as many comments about seeking common ground than the average negotiators do. The next is long-term versus short-term focus. So short-term focus is get Colleen's signature on a document today. That is the ultimate short-term focus. A slightly less short-term focus is I'm selling widgets, she's buying widgets, I want her to buy some widgets today. So we are in fact going to swap some money and swap some widgets, but long-term focus is, can I sell her widgets next month? Can I sell her widgets next year? Can I sell widgets for the next 5 years? Those are long-term focus. So skilled negotiators spend twice as much time in the planning thinking about long-term considerations. Is this somebody that I can cultivate a relationship with and go to over and over again to negotiate successfully and profitably? However, the research also shows that skilled negotiators spent less than 10% of their time focused on long term. And the researchers here believe that other research indicates that even that should be improved, that even skilled negotiators can get better by spending more than 10% of their time, 12, 15% of their time on thinking about long-term implications of the negotiation they're undergoing. So skilled negotiators spent twice as much time as average negotiators thinking about long-term focus, but they only spent 8% of the time talking about that. So next is setting flexible limits. So during the planning stage, setting flexible limits or goals on the as to setting a range rather than a single price. So skilled negotiators say we hope to get 34, but we'll settle for 31. So that gives the negotiator some flexibility, some ability to have a range to feel out the other side, see how far I can go, get the best number I can, but to settle within a range that my client likes, rather than a single point. Less skilled negotiators go in saying, we're going to get 33. And if they get 32, they walk away. If they get, but they don't even open themselves up to the possibility of getting 34 because that is not within their range. So flexibility is a mark of a skilled negotiator, and it helps in setting goals and pathways to attain those goals. Other research that these researchers cited indicate that it's best in planning for a negotiation to set 3 goals: maximum, minimum, and target. So maximum is what is the best I think I can get. Minimum is what is the least I'm willing to accept. And target is what am I really shooting for? Because, I would hope I get more than minimum. I know I'm unlikely at maximum, but what am I really shooting for? So what am I going to what number am I really going to sort of press for? What's my real target, my real goal? One way of handling this, and I'm going slightly off script here for a second, but one way of looking at this is your maximum needs to be within ZOPA, Z-O-P-A, which stands for Zone of Possible Agreement. So back to Colleen's negligent car wreck. Okay, is it within the zone? Y'all are lawyers. Y'all have handled car wreck cases or know some lawyers who've handled car wreck cases. Is it within the zone of possible agreement that I'm going to get $1 million for my leg? She wrecked my car, hit my door, the car needs to be repaired, and I broke my leg. So zone of possible agreement means something that is possible. So going in and asking Colleen's insurance adjuster for $1 million is going to be a waste of everybody's time. So I need to start out. Now I can ask a jury for $1 million because Lord knows they might be stupid enough to give it to me. But for the negotiation, going in asking for something unreasonable is just a waste of everybody's time. So what is the most I think I'm likely to get? For my broken leg, probably a couple $100,000 is the very most. So starting out at $250 is not completely unreasonable. Now, Colleen's insurance guy's not going to pay it to me. They think I'm sort of nuts, but at least it'll keep the conversation going. But it may be a little on the high side. Minimum should be at least 20,000, maybe 25, but 10, 20, 30,000, 20, somewhere in that range. That's the minimum. What is my target? My target's $40,000, $50,000. That's what I'd like. Like a little bit more than that, like upper 10,000s if I get it, 80, 90. But so you set a maximum, but the maximum needs to be within the range of possibility, a minimum, which once again needs to be within the range of possibility. For the insurance company to come in and say, Mr. Laney, very sorry about your leg. We're paying you $0 today. Does that move the ball at all? No, of course not. I'm not about to accept $0. That's not within the ZOPA, within the zone of possible agreement. So both sides need to come in with an offer that's within the possible zone. So this shows flexibility. Another problem with in some planning is sequence planning. So sequence planning is planning not just we want to do these things, but the order in which we will do them, the order in which we will talk about them. So the average negotiator comes in with this elaborate plan of saying, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about this, and then hopefully we'll have an agreement. A more flexible agreement plan, which is what the skilled negotiators do, is say, these are the issues I want to talk about that I think are important to get us to an agreement, but I don't really care what order they come in. So a way of thinking about this, once again, back to my sports metaphor. So I'm in my backyard playing basketball, back when I was a kid, playing basketball all by myself. So I'm dribbling the ball and I'm saying, Frank Laney is here. He's at the World Championships for basketball and he's got the ball and the time is counting down. And so he fakes left and he goes right and he shifts it to his other hand and he puts a layup and it goes in and yay, Frank Laney wins the World Championship. Now that's a lot of fun in your backyard when nobody's playing defense. And you can score when nobody's playing defense. But the problem is in a negotiation, the other side is going to play defense. And so if you have this detailed plan of I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. The other side is not necessarily going to cooperate. Maybe the first step or maybe the second step, but eventually they're going to go, whoa, whoa, I've got some issues I would like to talk about. And so then in the middle of, if you have this detailed, non-flexible sequence plan, then what happens in the middle of your negotiation is the other side stops playing along. And so you can do one of two things. You can abandon your plan and improvise, in which case you don't have a plan anymore. You're now improvising. So that means there is no plan. Or you can stick to the plan over the objections of the other side, and that's what's called being a bully. So you can bulldoze the other side, and there goes your goodwill and your ability to get a good resolution, because you have stuck to a plan that is not working and the other side is getting mad at you. So skilled negotiators plan each event independent of any sequence, do not draw sequence links, and they do issue planning rather than sequence planning and therefore they have greater flexibility. So in the planning process, skilled negotiators make half as many statements related to sequence planning as less skilled negotiators do, average negotiators. So the next is understanding the other side, which is once back again to our theme, one of our themes, flexibility and understand the other side. So the knowledge of the facts of the situation are not enough. The facts of the situation you can get from your client, assuming your client knows all the facts and is honest with you and doesn't shade the facts. Maybe you get them in discovery, but negotiators need to understand not just the facts of the situation, but also what the other side wants and needs. So to get an agreement, there needs to be a payoff for the other side. So that's something that sometimes people sort of forget in a negotiation. A negotiation is not just about me getting what I want, because the only way I get what I want is that Colleen gets what she wants, or at least something that she wants. Colleen's a really nice lady. But if I were to walk in and say, here, just give me $50,000 for my broken leg, unless she's going to get something out of it, like naming a waiver and release, she's going to say, no, what am I getting out of this agreement? It's not satisfying my needs. And for me to satisfy her needs, I first need to know what her needs are. So try to understand the other side, find out what they want and need, because I've got to satisfy at least some of them to get them to agree to what I want, which satisfies my needs. So the other party is not just a neutral juror weighing the strengths of my case. They are an interested party who's looking for a deal that also benefits them. Part of this is also self and other. Skilled negotiators consider the words and behaviors that will move the other side. So what would move Colleen or Colleen's attorney to accept the offer I'm making? And one of the ways I do that is to think about what will move me, and also helps me plan. So what can Colleen say in this negotiation that will move me to stretch, to go beyond where my target is, head down toward my minimum or up to my maximum, whichever side I'm on. But what are the things that will convince me to move? And therefore, what are the things that I can use to convince her? So think about myself and the other. So what are the conditions that will cause us to move toward an agreement? These researchers, as well as citing other research, indicates that one of the best ways to plan is to create a chart with 3 columns. The we issues, me and my team. What do we want? The they issues. What do we think the other side? What do I think Colleen will want out of this? I've dealt with her before. We've had this interaction that led to this negotiation. So I have some notion. I don't know everything Colleen knows, needless to say, but what are some of the things that I think that she's going to want? And then in the middle, we put in overlap. What are the things that I want that I think that also she wants? Which gets me back to that setting the climate of agreement, coming into negotiation with 1, 2, 3 things that I think both of us are going to want and will agree to very quickly. So you have to figure that out in the planning stage. You don't just walk in and suddenly it's an epiphany in the negotiation. In the planning stage, you set this up by coming up with what are the overlap issues? What are the things that both of us are going to want? Um, a but I've already talked a little bit about loss aversion. So one of the benefits of these overlap issues is that once Colleen and I have locked these in, it leads both of us to work harder toward an agreement because we are now averse to losing the things that we've already agreed to. So that's loss aversion. So people will work harder to make sure they don't lose things that they think they already have in their pocket. So Colleen, tell us about behaviors that occur in the negotiation.
Yeah, so I think y'all have gathered the point that these researchers say, and we also agree, that planning is critical, and significant time planning how you're going to go into the mediation, thinking about not only what you want, but what the other side wants, but remaining flexible are all incredibly important. So now let's shift to talking about the behaviors that were observed by the researchers during the actual negotiations that they observed. So first, we're going to talk about 4 behaviors that skilled negotiators avoid, and maybe a little bit about what to do about them, how to deal with them if they arise in your negotiation, although less time will be spent on that today and more time on the how to in the part 2 and part 3 of the series. And then Frank will talk about the 4 things that the skilled negotiators do in negotiations. So first, the things that they avoid doing. Let's talk first about irritators. So these are words, certain words or phrases used in a negotiation that have a negligible value in persuading the other side, but actually cause irritation that can be counterproductive to reaching an agreement, right? If the goal of going into a negotiation is to persuade somebody to do something, irritating them is probably going to be counter to helping you get them towards doing what you would like them to do. So these are things like describing your offer as a very generous offer, or fair, or reasonable, or describing your client as exceedingly reasonable, right? Why are these irritators? Well, because if I say to Frank, here's my very generous offer, I am implying that his prior offers were not generous. Or if I am being fair, or my client's being fair or reasonable, I am implying that the other side is therefore being unreasonable or unfair, which could actually lead to yet another challenge that the skilled negotiators avoid, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is defend and attack spirals. So it's going to irritate Frank, and it may actually make him defensive, and we're going to get off track for our negotiation. So we generally, most negotiators, the science found, know not to come right out and insult people, but what it seems like these researchers found was that what we find hard to do, what average negotiators do more of, is offer gratuitously favorable things about themselves that end up irritating the other side and are actually counterproductive. And so the skilled negotiators use significantly less of these irritators per hour of speaking time in these negotiations, is what Rackham and Carlisle observed. And so if this does come up in a negotiation and you are with someone who is using irritators and you're able to spot it, what are some things that you can do? One, you can ignore it. And I know that might be difficult because the irritation may stimulate your knee-jerk reaction and you may really want to do something about it. But ignoring it and not taking the bait could be a really effective strategy. You could also try reframing, restating, summarizing, clarifying if that's really what they mean. And then the go to the balcony comes from getting to yes and the Harvard program on negotiation, which essentially means take a break, take a pause, go to the balcony like an intermission of a theater performance, to see if you can sort of level set and come back online. So avoid irritators. The skilled negotiators used irritators significantly less than the average negotiators. The second one that the researchers found that was avoided by the skilled negotiators were quick counter proposals. And so what we mean by this is putting forward a quick, immediate response. When you receive a proposal from the other side, you instantly counter with your proposal. And so the skilled negotiators made quick counter proposals less than half as frequently as the average negotiators. Why is this important? Because when you're receiving a proposal, if you instantly respond, you may introduce new or additional issues that the other side has no preparation whatsoever to receive. You're going to be perceived as disagreeing and flat out rejecting their proposal, as opposed to perhaps there's something about their proposal that does work. You just need to tweak a portion of it. And there's also going to be a perception that you weren't actually listening to them if you immediately give your counter proposal. So they're going to have a perception that you are not respecting them or the process and not listening to what they have to say. And so some of the things that we recommend doing in light of this research is be sure to summarize back the proposal that you hear. Take the time when you listen to a proposal you're receiving to state it back. Frank, so what I'm hearing you say is that it's really important that your production line never stops, you never have any downtime to get these widgets out, right? Did I get that right? So summarizing, reflecting back, checking for understanding before you then make your response and your counter proposal. All right, I previewed it a little. This is the third behavior that the researchers found skilled negotiators avoided, and it is the defend and attack spiral. So we all know that conflict can lead us to become emotionally heated. We're human. Our emotions might get triggered and get involved. There may be value-loaded language that we are on the receiving end of or that we use. When that is used to attack the other party or make an emotional defense, it can turn into this defend-attack spiral. The intensity can increase and it could quickly become counterproductive towards the goal of making a deal. And so some examples might be, in a negotiation, well, you can't blame us for that, or it's not our fault that this issue has arisen. Something that can trigger the emotions and increase the intensity, and it's often directing you away from solving the problem, right? And so those are ineffective, and the skilled negotiators tend to fall into these defend and attack spirals much less often than the average negotiator. Interestingly, though, the skilled negotiators, when they do use them, they seem to be a little bit more deliberate about them, and they can often come out of nowhere, versus the average negotiators may start slowly and sort of build up. Although the perception from the researchers is that the average negotiators, when they get in these defend and attack spirals, seem to have done so without a deliberate strategic purpose for it. So you want to avoid the knee-jerk reaction and use this if you're going to intentionally be using it for a strategy, although the research is that this is really not an effective negotiation strategy. So you want to avoid it, focus on what you want and not what the other side is doing or saying. And I know that's easier said than done, but that will help you stay out of the defend attack spiral. Try not to be reactive, try to pause and choose your response instead of just having that knee-jerk reaction. All right, and then the last behavior that Rackham and Carlisle found that the skilled negotiators avoided is argument dilution. And this was a really interesting one, I think, especially for those of us who have been litigators and are used to laying out multiple arguments, whether it's in a brief or oral argument. Most people see arguments as a set of scales, and the more reasons in support of my argument that I can put on one side of the scale, then that's going to tip things in my favor. The research is actually finding that the opposite is true, and that skilled negotiators use fewer reasons to back up their arguments. And there's a couple of reasons why. It makes it easier for the other party to choose which of your arguments to attack. And of course, if they're skilled, they're going to choose the weaker ones and then ignore your stronger arguments. So the weak arguments tend to dilute the strong arguments, and that's why it's not as effective to list them all at once. And so the skilled negotiators tended to advance a single reason at a time to support their position, and then only moved on to a fallback reason if the main reason wasn't gaining traction. And so the skilled negotiators use multiple reasons and argument dilution significantly less than the average negotiators. So Frank, now that we've talked about the things to avoid, why don't you talk to us about the things that the researchers found skilled negotiators do, that they use, and that we should use?
Yes. So the first behavior, and by the way, let me back up and say that I ran into this research just I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, when I had been a mediator, lawyer, negotiator for a long, long time. And I will acknowledge that a lot of this stuff was complete and utter news to me. I'd never heard about it, never seen it, nobody ever talked about it. And one of them is behavior labeling. So I'd never even thought about this, but I think it can be an effective tool. So behavior labeling is labeling your behavior before you do it. So instead of, Colleen, what did you have for lunch yesterday? I instead say, Colleen, can I ask you a question? Or Colleen, what do you want to have for lunch today? Say, Colleen, can I ask you a question? Or Colleen, can I make a suggestion? And by labeling the behavior, it has several outcomes, but that's what behavior labeling is letting the other person know I am about to exhibit a behavior, usually verbal. I'm about to say something, ask a question, make a suggestion, do something verbally. So I'm labeling it. So what is the effect of that? A couple is, one is I draw attention to it. So Colleen, may have been thinking, she's already thinking about what she wants to have for lunch today. She's about what she had for lunch to yesterday. So that's where her head is. She's still listening to what's going on, but 20, 30, 40% of her brain is thinking about something else. Or maybe thinking about how her husband did not leave lunch on the table today like he was supposed to do before he went off to work. And now she's got to fix lunch for her and the kids and whatever. So her mind is somewhere else, wherever that may be. What I do is I say, Colleen, can I ask you a question? Her mind is stopping thinking about lunch yesterday. She stopped thinking about her husband, stopped thinking about her kids, and is focused on Frank and what is his question going to be. So I now have her complete and utter focus. Also, we're in the middle of a negotiation. So, Colleen, can I ask you a question? I mean, that's a layup. I mean, unless Colleen really doesn't want a deal and is really here to screw up a deal, then the answer is going to be, sure, you can ask a question. We're here to talk. So by asking the question, can I ask you a question? And her saying, sure, you can ask me a question. I have increased the social pressure or the social likelihood that she will in fact answer my question. So if I say, can I ask you a question? And then she says yes, and I ask her a question, she's much less likely to go, well, I don't like that question, or you shouldn't be asking me questions. She just gave me permission to ask her questions, particularly, and this is a particular realm of behavior labeling. Colleen, can I ask you a question? I know this is maybe a little sensitive, and I know it may be a little difficult, but I think it's important. Can I ask you something? And she goes, well, sure, I guess so, if it's important. And so then I ask her something sensitive about, when did she stop beating her husband, or whatever the question happens to be. So, but by labeling it that, and by getting her permission, she's less likely to say, oh, how dare you ask that question? That's an insult. I just asked you if I could. You said I could. I'm sorry that I upset you. So I've increased the social pressure, the social likelihood that she'll in fact respond. I've also lessened the negative impact of a negative question. So I've made it less likely that she'll have a volcanic eruption back at me because she doesn't like the question by going through this behavior labeling process. It also reduces the ambiguity. So something that I need to practice on is my wife and I are sitting here reading, watching TV, looking at our phones, whatever. And instead of saying, Ann's my wife's name, and da 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 da. Okay, so where is Ann's brain at the moment when I start speaking? It's on whatever she's reading on her phone, it's on the TV program, it's whatever book she's reading, whatever. And so when does she really start listening and comprehending my question? About the fourth or fifth word. She doesn't even hear. Her brain cannot process the first half of my question because her brain is somewhere else. And it takes it at least a moment to come and focus. So if I want to have clear communication with her, I need to say, Ann, can I ask you a question? Ann, can I make a suggestion? Then she will mentally put aside whatever she's focused on, or she'll say, wait a minute, let me finish this. And then she'll come back and she'll put aside whatever she's focused on and then listen to me. And so it clarifies the communication and reduces ambiguity. Because otherwise, what happens is I say, uh, just she's looking at whatever. I just blurt out da 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 da. She doesn't hear it, and so she has to say, "What did you say?" And I have to repeat it again. And now I'm irritated because she's not listening to me, and she's irritated because I'm now yelling at her, et cetera, et cetera. So it helps clarify things if we simply gain their attention first. Also, this is sort of a dirty trick. So Colleen and I like to talk about, clean and helpful things, but I'll admit that this is a little bit of a dirty trick. That it's nothing nasty about it, but when I say, Colleen, can I ask you a question? I'm hijacking her head, her brain. So what happens is she was thinking about something else. She's now focused on me. She's now then focused on what I just said. Can I ask you a question? Her brain has got to process those English words and formulate a response. What do I want? How do I want to respond? What's going on here? How's Frank doing? What I'm doing? Where we're headed? Et cetera, et cetera. And then she gives a response. All that time, her brain is doing what I have asked it to do. I have pushed it down a path, and her brain is rolling down that path, not doing anything she wants it to do. It's doing what I want it to do. And so in the meantime, while her brain is doing that, this doesn't mean it'll take a long time, but brains are really quick. And so while she's doing it, I have a chance to relax my brain and think about what question I want to make. What do I want to ask? How do I want to ask it? What kind of response am I looking for? So I can now formulate my question while she's thinking. So behavior labeling, we avoid, in behavior labeling, however, I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing here. Got lost here for a second. Sorry. So skilled negotiators avoid behavior labeling when there are disagreements. So a skilled negotiator is not going to go, Colleen, I really do disagree with you, and let me tell you why. A couple of reasons for that. What average negotiators say is, yeah, I disagree, and these are the reasons why. What skilled negotiators do is they give the reasons. Colleen, I appreciate your offer. Let me talk about this, and let me talk about one and number two and number three and number four. And for those reasons, I simply cannot agree with your proposal. So once again, brain science. So when I start off with, I disagree, so Colleen has offered me 50. I say I disagree. Where is her brain going now? Her brain immediately starts going to, what is my next offer? Why is Frank disagreeing? But what is my next offer? So she's now thinking about what her rebuttal is going to be before she's ever heard my answer, my reasons. And so I now list 1, 2, 3, and 4, but she's barely listening. Her brain is focused on what her response is going to be. And you've all heard about that, in a conversation, we spend more time thinking about how we're going to respond than we do listening to the other person. And so I've set Colleen up for that by saying I disagree. She already knows the punchline. Why listen to the joke? So she's now often running to what her next offer is going to be, not even listening to why I'm making the offer I'm making. But I reverse it instead, give her all the reasons. And so she's now listening with bated breath. Okay, all these reasons sound important. I can understand, but where is this going? What's Frank's response going to be? Is he going to say that I can accept your offer, but we need some twiddles? I can't accept your offer. Make me a new offer. What? So I am controlling her brain by reversing the behavior labeling. So in behavior labeling, uh, skilled negotiators do it 1/4 as much time as an average negotiator when they're disagreeing, but overall they do it 5 times as much. So basically, when you're disagreeing, skilled negotiators don't behavior label at all, but other times they do it 5 times as much. They are drawing people into the conversation. So next is seeking information, asking questions. Why do we ask questions? To obtain information, to also steer and control the conversation. I ask Colleen a question, and her response is going to be where I want it to go because it's answering this particular question rather than that particular question. So I'm able to subtly, gently steer and control the conversation. I convey opposition better than direct disagreement. So I ask a question to analyze what it is Colleen is asking for, to let her know I don't understand, or to say, I'm not really quite sure I agree or I'm buying into this yet by asking questions about it. I keep the other person active and in the conversation at the same time reducing their thinking time. So while Colleen is putting together and answering my question, her brain is occupied and she is not as able to formulate what she wants to say. Um, it also gives me a mental break to think about what I want to do. But I think one of the very important things is, although it's last on the list, is it shows interest. By asking Colleen questions, I am conveying to Colleen, I am interested in what you have to say. I think enough about you and what you have to say that I want to hear more. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of relationship. I care about you enough and your thoughts to ask you questions and to want you to be engaged in this conversation. So skilled negotiators spend over twice as much time trying to seek information. And so, what should you do with this? As Colleen said, a lot of this is simply good communication skills. So what I would suggest is develop a habit of asking questions when people are talking to you about, and before you respond, ask at least one question before you respond. Uh, and practice it not just in negotiation, but in your daily communication with other people. So summarizing and clarifying. So that's related to asking questions, but sort of the next step. So I ask questions. Colleen gives me an answer. The next thing I do is summarize and clarify. So Colleen, I understand that you're saying X, Y, Z. Do I understand you? So it's a short restatement of previous points discussed. It sorts out misunderstandings and misconceptions. So if Colleen said it this way and I restated it another way, said, no, that's not what I meant. I meant it this way. These words were important. So it allows us to clarify before we start accepting or rejecting what the other person is saying. So skilled negotiators use clarifying questions considerably more. Um, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, implementation concerns. So average negotiators focus on making a deal and they fail to test understanding. Okay, 2,000 widgets at $4 a piece, 2,000 widgets, $4 a piece. Great, we got a deal. Okay, but the problem is, when are we going to do it? How is the payment going to be? What is delivery? Who's paying for delivery? Average negotiators, once they have what they think of as a deal, don't bother to look at all these other issues and clarify and summarize. So their primary objective is to get an agreement. Skilled negotiators are more concerned about successful implementation, and therefore they're also looking at long term. So if Colleen does a deal with me and we get the widgets and I do get my $4, but we have a lot of Sturm and Drang between now and then about costs and shipping and other things and when and all sorts of stuff. Is Colleen going to buy my widgets next year? No, she's going to deal with somebody that she knows she can trust, because she can't trust that Frank guy because he did not follow through. Problem is we didn't really have a deal. But so skilled negotiators make sure we have a complete deal. So we summarize and reflect to make sure we're understanding the other side. So skilled negotiators do more than twice as much of summarizing and clarifying and make testing understanding, make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're in fact agreeing to the same thing. The last point I want to make is feelings commentary. I know we're running short on time here. Feelings commentary is making statements about what is going on inside my head. I feel that we're not making much progress. I, there's, I'm worried about how far apart we are. So the reason for it is to make the other person understand or believe that they understand me better. So my motivations are clearer. So um, it builds trust, it builds relationship between us, and makes it seem like things are clearer to the other side because they now understand my motivation. Um, However, skilled negotiators give internal information like how I feel more often. External information like facts, I tend to hold closer to my vest. Skilled negotiators tend to give away facts only when necessary, but how I feel about things or kind of where we're headed or what my motivation is, they tend to be much more open about that. So skilled negotiators give feelings commentary twice as often as average negotiators. And you can see in the slide there, the citation to these two articles. It's going to be very, very difficult to find. So we have provided them to you, provided them to Alta Pro, and they have, I believe, forwarded them to you and made them available to you for your reading. They're not very long. They're about 4 or 5 pages each. So, Colleen.
I know we had a couple of questions in the chat. So, Frank, can you think of another real world example of sequence planning besides your basketball analogy? And while you're thinking of that, we had another question of what role does humor play? That was not addressed in this study, but I would say that appropriate humor goes to building trust and rapport, but it has to be well placed and well timed, right? And so I'll see if you want to add anything to sequence planning or humor. Yes, you should be able to get a copy of the slides. It should have been put in the chat, but if it needs to be put in there again, I'm sure that they will put that in the chat again.
As to humor, I'll be honest and say I tend to think of myself as a funny guy. I'm a conversationalist. I enjoy talking. I enjoy talking with people. And so humor is part of that. In a negotiation, it's very common that, I'll come in and start talking about, the weather or the basketball game or, what's going on in sports or whatever, not jump into the tough topic because I want to build relationship. I want to build rapport with somebody. Humor can play a role of that, but Colleen has already highlighted that, yes, you have to be careful. You have to be careful because what's funny to some person may not necessarily be funny to everybody. And so you need to use it carefully. As for resources, getting to yes is one you've probably already heard of. Getting to yes is the grandfather of them all. Also, there's 2 subsequent books written by the same authors: Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, and Getting Together. So if you go onto Amazon and look at Getting to Yes, you'll probably see these other books below: Getting Past No and Getting Together. Getting to Yes is how to is the how to reach collaborative agreements. Getting Together is sort of like the next 4 steps. So it's sort of like they've thought about it some more. This is sort of the sequel to it. Getting Past No is focused on how do I deal with somebody who doesn't want to play this game, who wants to be a tough hardball negotiator. How do I get that person to get to yes? Another book that is one of my favorites is Bargaining for Advantage, which is by Richard Schell, Shell. It's a fairly thick, dense book. Getting to Yes, you can read in an afternoon or a long day, or a long afternoon or a day, certainly. Richard Schell's book is a good bit thicker, but he is looking at how we play the game of negotiation collaboratively. So I personally think that probably the Bargaining for Advantage was probably a title made up by somebody else who did not write the book because it doesn't really reflect the book, but it's how to collaboratively get together.
So let me jump in,
time.
Frank. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Right.
We are right at 2 o'clock, and in deference to everybody's schedules, I want to go ahead and conclude, at least so folks that don't want to hang around can move on. And we're going to stay for more questions and comments as well. So if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of wrap up
Sure.
a little bit. And so, first of all, uh, thank you both for putting this on. It was fantastic information. I love the practical examples and the explanations of the data. You made it easy to understand and digest. And I think it's a really, really good precursor or prep for the upcoming art of negotiation sessions. So we'll be able to talk a little bit more even then about other great books on this topic, like Getting to Yes and Getting to Know and everything. For me, it's just like talking to my kids. Um, anyway, thanks for everyone who attended. As a specialty provider on lawyers professional liability, we feel it's our obligation to provide these types of CLE webinars that feature real life, timely, and relevant content in order to, provide you real value to you and your practice. So we hope you found this a good use of your time, and we certainly enjoyed delivering the webinar to you. So this will conclude part one of our three-part series. Real quick, we've got the next two sessions coming up on October and November, October 20th and November 17th. So if you haven't registered for those, please do. Survey will open at when you leave the session, and you can fill that out. And the code words are science and negotiations, so not surprising. And I will go ahead and close this off. We will stay for another 10 minutes or so. If we've got questions that haven't been answered from the Q&A, let's start addressing those. And if we have other people that want to stay on and ask questions, please use the Q&A to do so. Alrighty, thank you.
Someone had asked about sequence planning, and um, one that comes to my mind is going into a negotiation saying, I want to establish certain points first. So back to the car wreck, you know, I'm going into this negotiation. The first thing I want is to make sure that Colleen agrees that she ran a stop sign. And therefore, second is that she is liable. So let's get liability off the table. And only then am I interested in talking about actual damages and how much it will be. Well, I may get there and Colleen's people may say, well, we think liability is important, but we think that there's at least some chance that Colleen is not liable. The stop sign had been knocked down, I don't know what, but they have some points. So they're not willing to pay 100% of the liability. They think that whatever the damages are should be reduced by 10, 15, 20, 25% because there's a chance that a jury is going to find Colleen not liable. So that would be a very simple example of sequence planning, of where somebody goes in saying, I want to establish these points first, and but the other side's going, no, that's not what we're interested in doing. And so you're getting frustrated because you want to move forward with this plan. They want to approach it from a different angle. Or maybe, for example, well, before we get into liability, because we think that liability is an important factor, but let's first talk about damages. Are we talking about a $100,000 case, $1 million case, or a $20,000 case? So let's see your medicals, let's see your damages, let's sort through those first. So that may be what the sequence they want to apply. And so you're now sort of, as my granddad would say, up a gum stump. You have a plan that's just not working.
Yeah, right. And it dovetails with the flexibility, the emphasis on flexibility in your planning as well as flexibility in your negotiation. That if you go in with too much rigidity about the steps, the specific steps that you plan to take, and you've mapped out how the negotiation is going to go, and you're stuck and you're rigid on it, the research shows that that's just not going to be as effective as if you've thought about the issues, but you're willing to be flexible in how they are addressed and how the negotiation ends up going, right? Like Frank's example of the leaf going down the stream, right? If you're willing to be flexible in where you bend, that seems to be better and be more effective in your planning time. Another question was, can you give us a few other examples of irritating words or phrases? So think gratuitously favorable. So if I'm saying, you know, Frank, you're really going to like this deal. It's a really great deal. You know,
The example that
is he likely to agree? No, he's probably likely to have his antennae up that he needs to, he's smelling out the you know what right away. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, now, yeah, the example that I use is or the area that I like to use is, think of a used or stereotypic. You know, I'm not trying to slam anybody in particular, and malign any industries, but think of the stereotypic used car salesman. You know, comes out, you walk on the lot, got a whole spiel, a whole set of things to say, none of which are convincing. I mean, on the surface, the words sound like they should be, but because of the way they're conveyed, the context, etc., they're not in fact convincing. And so what do they make you do? The fact that you're confronted with this person who comes out and talks this way, in fact, it puts your defenses up. Whoa, you know, I know this person's a fast talker, a slick salesperson. I need to, you know, be very careful before I shake this person's hand.
All right, another question in the Q&A. What if one side is firm and doesn't budge? What do you suggest in that situation? I mean, we'll touch on this with some of our tools and habits in part 2 and part 3. There's lots of different things you can do.
The first answer I have is ask questions. You know, how do you get there? Why are you there? What's, you know, just the, if you think a deal is doable, but the other side just can't get there, then what that means to me is, as in the general scale of the universe, means that you don't have enough information. So I ask questions. I go back, maybe go back to an earlier stage in the process and start asking more questions, plowing more ground, trying to find more information. You know, maybe the reason they're stuck is because they've misunderstood me. They thought that I, you know, was sexist and demeaning to Colleen, and they're not going to put up with it, and they're not going to have it anymore. And I go, whoa, whoa, whoa! I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. You're right. I did say those words. So, you know, there is some disconnect somewhere. Now, it could be that they're just nuts. That happens. There are people who are borderline crazy that wind up in our court systems. And there may not be a lot you can do. But another thing, by finding out information, finding out what it is that they don't understand, is that you can help them find that resource. You know, maybe you're dealing with a pro se person, you know, who's talked to their brother and their mother, but not to a lawyer. Well, is there some way you can get them to a lawyer who will tell them, no, you're never going to get $1 million out of this car wreck. You know, if you can get $10,000 or $20,000, you should, you know, run like a dog, you know, with the check. But so maybe help them figure out how to solve their own problems.
Yeah, and some of my sort of go-to questions are, you know, what is your primary concern with whatever it is you're talking about, the topic or with my proposal, right? Is there anything about my proposal that might work for you, right? If we changed something, could we change a part of the proposal to make it work for you? What is your concern? What is important to you or your client, whatever the case may be? And then, as Frank mentioned earlier in the presentation, when you're talking about, is money the only option? Another question is there something other than money that will help us move forward, or something other than money that will help us solve this problem? Anything else? We're about to wrap up for good.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you both, and thanks everybody for attending, and we will see you in